Do you see this map? You're looking at a simple hand-drawn image. You probably recognize that image. The reason you can recognize it is that the shape of the image tells you that it is the state of Minnesota. We need borders and boundaries to help us recognize geographic spaces. Our brain recognizes the edges of the image, in this case state borders, and tells us we're looking at Minnesota. No other state has this exact shape. But have you ever wondered why those edge lines, the borders or boundaries, take the shape they do? Someone, usually a map maker called a cartographer, had to put them on a map. But is the cartographer the only person who has a say in what route boundaries take? Who drew them, and why did they take that shape? In this podcast, we will learn about some of the Minnesota border shapes and how and why they came to look as they do today. Our focus is on the meaning of borders and especially on the human factors which influence border creation. This podcast was created for the Minnesota Geography students and their teachers by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. MAGE is a group of volunteers whose mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. There are several Minnesota geography standards which apply to this podcast. Our presenter on Borders and Boundaries of Minnesota is Dr. David Lanegren. Dr. Lanegren is the director of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education and is a professor of geography at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. I am Fred Kunze, a retired master teacher and a member of the MAGE Steering Committee and producer of most MAGE podcasts.
This map shows the territory of Minnesota as it existed in the mid-1850s. The state stretches from the St. Croix River on the east to the Missouri River on the west, and then the southern border is the northern border of Iowa, and the northern border is the border with Canada. When the territorial government determined there were enough people in this territory to warrant the creation of a state, they instructed the territorial representative to Congress to request a law that would empower the state of Minnesota to be created. That is, a convention could be held in Minnesota that would produce the constitution of the state, and then when the Congress ratified that, Minnesota would change from a territory to a state. There was an attitude in Congress that states should not be too large, so it was fairly early determined that the territorial boundaries would not be the boundaries of the final state, and that the western boundary would be moved eastward. Now this map is an interesting one because if you look carefully, you'll see there's a red line that extends down into Iowa, and there's a text block down in Iowa. That red boundary is the boundary of the land that was ceded by the Dakota people to the U.S. government at the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux. And although it's hard to see the boundary, it's outlined in red. It is visible, but you have to look carefully to see it. The cession went as far west as the Sioux River. When the government of the territory instructed their representative, Edmund Rice in Washington, to petition Congress for the Enabling Act, they suggested that the western boundary of the state be the midpoint of the Red River of the north and the boundary of the Dakota Cession, that is this red line on the western side, the majority of which followed the Sioux River. This next map shows the boundary according to the wishes of the territorial government. And in December of 1856, the territorial representative introduced a bill to Congress asking that the state be created along this line. this map maker somehow knew that that was the plan for the territory and wanted to be as current as possible, so made and published a map of the boundary of the state before the state actually was created. The map maker proved to be wrong, because when the bill went into Congress and was submitted to the Committee on Territories, the Committee on Territories, for some reason, decided that they would draw the line as straight as an arrow from the lakes down to the Iowa border and not include the area in the Sioux watershed. This next map shows the attempt by the publisher to update map of 1855 to 1857. But of course, this map was not made in 1857. It was made in 1856 and dated in advance. So this map shows a close-up of the territory in question. So the land from the Sioux River eastward was given to Dakota rather than kept inside Minnesota. We don't know why the committee made this change. When questioned, the chairman of the committee said that, well, it's not very much land, it doesn't make much difference. So the next map shows the actual boundary as was determined by the Committee on Territories in the Congress in 1857. And now Sioux Falls, the city of Sioux Falls, is part of South Dakota rather than part of Minnesota. The map makers quickly produced new editions of their old maps, drawing in the correct line, and the state southern and western boundaries were settled along these geometric straight arrow lines.
You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Visit the MAGE website now. At our website, you can find many geography resources, links, lessons, student enrichments, geography podcasts, annotated geography websites, geography curriculum suggestions, and much more. All for free. The Minnesota Alliance is a nonprofit group of volunteer educators who work to promote an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Decorah, Iowa. This is Fred Kunze.